This is Doc Frazier.
And I'm Clyde Stanley.
And this is the Hometown Music Show.
Brought to you live from the Hometown Music Studio.
Our little show here is dedicated to local artists and players and general characters, and brought to you by the good folks here on WMMT.
And today we have the multi-talented, good friend to us all, Mr. George Gibson.
Hey,
Hi, George.
Good evening.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm great.
Well, we're really glad to have you as a part of our show here today. Let's tell a little bit about who you are, George. Tell everybody, your ties to the area and where you were born and raised at and that kind of stuff.
Well, I was born and raised on the North Fork of the South Fork of the North Fork of the Kentucky River, over Knott County side, at the confluence of Big Doubles, Little Doubles, and Buffalo Creeks. Most people call it Little Car. When I was growing up, we called it Burgess Creek. Wonderful place to grow up.
Now,
And,
you told me the other night how come people called it Burgess Creek.
Well, many of the original settlers were Ambergies, and Burgie is a shortened form of Ambergy. So I had lots of neighbors and friends that were Ambergies.
So you born and how long did you stay there in Knott County?
I went to high school at Car Creek, and been gone 30-some years.
And so you grew up in a musical family?
Well, my father, I heard a rumor that he had played the banjo. I sort of learned on my own, and then after I had beaten the banjo to death, he picked it up one day and totally amazed me. He was a great old-time banjo player, and probably still could if I could talk him into it. He's 95.
Is that right?
Yes.
Well, congratulations. Well, so you were learning to play the banjo, not realizing that your dad was already doing it.
Well, one of the folks that I learned from was a gentleman named Mel Ambergy, a wonderful banjo player and balladeer and a great singer. He told me that he and my father's sister learned to play at the same time, and he said that they could play 101 songs in the same tuning of the banjo. That might have been a slight exaggeration, but they must have learned to play around 1905 to 1910. I know I asked my father once how old he was when he learned to play, and he didn't really know because his father played and had a banjo sitting around, so he must have learned quite early.
How did, well, I guess first thing I want to say is that George is very knowledgeable about the origins of some of these instruments, and especially the Appalachian parts of them. How did people get started in this region having banjos to play?
Some of the people who are studying banjo history today and doing research feel that the banjo came into the mountains during and after the Civil War because a lot of Civil War soldiers did play the banjo. Minstrel music was very popular at that time, and there were troops touring and, one or two people touring and playing the banjo and doing minstrel shows. I feel, however, the banjo was in the mountains earlier because the banjo was brought to us by the blacks. It's well documented. Thomas Jefferson, in his notes on Virginia in 1781, said that the banjo was a proper instrument of the slave. And there were black people in the mountains very early. And I'm sure that they had that instrument. In Boonesboro, the first person killed at the siege of Boonesboro in 1778 was a black, and one of the most talented people there was Monk, a slave who taught Daniel Boone how to make gunpowder, by the way, and he provided the music for the settlement, but I have not been able to discover what instruments he played. It was common at that period of time for large slave owners to send one of their slaves to learn fiddle music, violin music.
And is that right?
Yes.
And so that they could to entertain.
Provide entertainment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you played there growing up.
I fell in love with the banjo when I was 12 or 14 years old, and the first instrument I had was a fiddle. Actually, I traded for it. But I didn't know any fiddlers around. I traded it off before I could learn Orange Blossom Special. So I ended up with the banjo and just was very lucky to have some people around who played the banjo like James Sloan and Mel Ambergy.
Well, let's take this opportunity right here to to let our folks here in our listening audience get a sampling of what you do, George. Now tell us a little bit about this first song that we're going to listen to.
The first song I'm going to play for you is called Morphine. I can't determine how early it was played in Knott County, but that's the only place I ever heard it. It was one of Mel Amberger's favorite tunes. And it tells a little something about drug addiction, which is not a new problem. But it's a wonderful old song, and it's one of my very favorites.
Let's take a listen.
Yeah.
It's regular tuning, open G. I took morphine last Saturday night. Lord, I took it in the morphine. If the doctor hadn't come just as he did, Lord, I'd been in my grave today. Well, it's peaches, honey, rye, rock and rhyme. Oh, baby, I'll love you till the day I die. I dreamed last night, had a pocket full of money and a quarter in a big dice game. But when I woke, it was only a joke. Lord, I didn't have a penny to make. Ain't that a scandalous shame? Well, it's peaches, honey, rye, rock and rhyme. Oh, baby, I'll love you till the day I die. I took morphine last Saturday night. Lord, I took it in that morphine night. If the doctor hadn't come just as he did, Lord, I'd been in my grave today.
All
Good
right,
job,
buddy.
George.
Thanks.
Well, on that song, what style of picking, and give us a little bit of background on that.
I play that similar to the way that Mel Amberger played it. It sounds a little different than most drop thumb picking because I'm doing a lot of picking with my left hand on the first string, and Mel Amberger did that quite often. He said that there was more music on the first string than any other string on the banjo, and it gives it sort of a unique sound. I do that on some songs. My style is different from Mel's and from my father's. I sort of developed my own style.
Right. Well, what
But
tuning was you in on that song?
I was in regular G tuning on
G-tuning?
that song. Yeah. Hmm.
Do you use picks?
No, I just play two finger.
No.
There's a few songs that I do 3-finger picking on, but it's not a bluegrass style. It's more of an old time style.
In earlier days, when people, the people you would have first listened to, they didn't use any kind of picks on their fingers, did they?
No, I actually didn't see anybody using picks. But when I grew up, the old timers around all played differently. They had different styles, and
Mostly, they're different versions of drop thumb styles.
yes, and 2-finger, different versions of that, and just very different styles. In fact, I don't know of any two people I met when I was growing up that played the banjo that played alike, or even close to the same, actually.
And I guess the drop throw would be considered also the claw hammer style. Is that
Yeah,
similar,
I hate
or-
that term, but that's actually. I
Is
just
that an
thought-
old term, or was it started
No,
out as a
I
drop
think
thumb?
that's term is just in recent years. I get that impression. It's not a term that I'm fond of. I just call it playing the banjo. But there are several different styles of banjo today, so
Right.
I guess we do have to distinguish between the different styles.
And so, banjo being like, your first love, you said you got the fiddle first.
Yes, but I traded it off before I could get very far with it.
Something about the sound of the banjo that just attracted you?
I just liked the banjo and that sound and that style of singing.
Now, you had some really unusual banjos, some very old and very unique instruments. They're very unique to look at, and also they're very unique to listen to. I wish our audience could have heard what we've got to already hear today. But it's sweet and mellow. Tell us about the banjo that you had out here showing us today and the sound of that
The
thing.
banjo that I showed you today was made around 1870, 65 to 70, so it's around 125 years old. Has very, very little metal in it, just some screws. It's very light, has no frets, just has little markers on the fretboard to indicate where you note it. A lot of banjos of that era had nothing. They were all fretless. You play those with either nylon strings or gut strings. Gut strings were used originally, and they just have a more plunky, a much more mellower sound. And in recent years, I've gotten more interested in the Civil War, minstrel age banjos, and pre-Civil War banjos. The pre-Civil War banjos actually are very rare.
And how are they different from what we were looking at earlier?
They are not standard size. I have a pre-Civil War banjo that has a 13-inch head. It's very deep, probably made by a drum maker. It has a skin on both sides, as was common with drums. One of the first known makers, Bosher, from Baltimore, was a drum maker.
I've heard some stories about local people, making their own instruments and that kind of stuff. Now, where did they acquire their instruments from? How did they get a hold of those?
Well, the first banjos were made from gourds for the head, with either the gourd neck helping to be the neck that you used to play, or some sort of wood piece added to the gourd. That's pretty well documented.
So were there...
And that was easy to make. And then in the mountains, of course, early on they started using cheese boxes and things like that to make banjos. They had a very simple instrument and easy to make. And I think that's one of the reasons it grew very popular in the mountains.
So just certain local people in the community would have the knowledge about how to make an instrument.
Yeah,
And that was the
just
source
about
of the
anybody could make a banjo. It wasn't that complicated.
Is that right?
Of course, you had to catch a groundhog for for the hide, and it's rumored that some people use cats, but I hope that isn't true.
Well, back to the strings. I mean, the nylon or gut strings you're talking about. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening would never think of a banjo having nylon strings or gut strings on it. Tell us a little bit about that.
The first strings were gut strings, and that gave the banjo a much plunkier sound. Of course, they're a little more temperamental than the metal strings, which actually didn't come in until around the turn of the century. Those strings are being made again today. There is a revived interest in the minstrel era music. I have a friend in Atlanta that's touring and playing minstrel age music from tutors and books published during that period of time. His name is Bob Flesher.
Yeah. And what's he doing? Like the college circuit kind of stuff?
He does quite a few different things, and I'm sure he does some the college circuit thing. And he's also building minstrel age banjos, replicas.
Well, buddy, let's come back to that in just a minute, and you can tell us just a little bit more about that. But right now, let's take another opportunity to let people hear a sample of these, and tell us what we might be listening to next.
I'm going to play one of my father's very favorite songs, Darlin Corey. He uses a very unique tuning on this, which I'm sure is the old tuning for Darlin Corey. Both bottom strings are tuned in unison, so they sound alike, and it gives the tune just a unique sound.
How was that information shared?
Well, my father picked up the banjo one day and played Darlin Corey, and then when he departed the room, I grabbed the banjo to figure out what he had done.
Well, let's take this opportunity and let them listen to this particular song.
Sounds a lot like Soldier's Joy. In your double C, you just drop the first string. Wake up, Darlin Corey. What makes you sleep so sound? I hear those robbers coming for to tear your still house down. Wake up, my darling. Go run and get my gun. I ain't no man for trouble. Lord, don't I before I run. Wake up, Darlin Corey. Go do the best you can. I've got me another woman. You can get you another man. Dig a hole in the meadow, dig a hole in the cocoa ground. Dig a hole down in the meadow, for to lay my darling down. First time I seen Darlin Corey was by the banks of the sea. Had a 45 all round her and a banjo on her knee.
Good job, George.
Oh man, that tuning.
Interesting, yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, George, let's talk a little bit more about Bob Flesher and the minstrel banjo and that era and stuff like that.
What
sound.
was a minstrel banjo player? What was that?
Well, prior to the Civil War, if America had a pop music, it was minstrelry. It began the late 1830s. The white folks adopted the banjo as their own, and they did performances in blackface. They used burnt cork to blacken their faces, and they played music, did dances and routines, a lot of which poked fun at the and created a caricature of the black slave, which was very unfortunate and very untrue. Consequently, over the years, blacks that played the banjo extensively sort of dropped that instrument. By the turn of the century, and in the urban areas, there were very, very few people, blacks, playing the banjo. Typical performance would be Jim Daddy Rice tottering on stage with a cane, dressed as a decrepit old black man, but doing a very agile dance, jumping over his cane and creating some low comedy. at the expense of the black people. Out of this experience came a lot of songs like Dixie. It was written by Dan Emmett, who was in minstrelsy from the 1840s on up until the 1890s, I believe.
And so what was a typical kind of venue? What kind of places would they be at when they would sing this kind of stuff?
They toured with fairs. They played theater, vaudeville. They toured England. A troupe of minstrels toured England, I believe, in 1843, and the music became immensely popular there. Banjo was popular in England a lot after it fell out of favor in the States, actually.
Now, another thing you were telling us about earlier is there was actually some banjo bands.
By the turn of the century, the banjo had really gone upscale. Beginning in the 1860s, the stroke style of banjo, which is similar to the drop thumb style we use today in the mountains, had been supplanted with the three-finger picking style, and classical music was played on the banjo. Classical music was played in the Academy of Music at Philadelphia, opera houses in London, and the virtuosos such as A. Farland toured all over, playing classical banjo and classical pieces, marches, waltzes, whatever.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And along about the 1890s, the all-banjo band became popular. So you had groups of people in a town with a music teacher that would form a banjo band of maybe 15 banjos, 20, 30.
And there were different types of banjos, right?
Yes, there were. There was a bass banjo, which is huge, and they had small banjos, they call it piccolo, and banjos of all sizes in between for each part in the band.
Well, what about the recordings? Are there any documented recordings, like old 78s or anything?
There are some early recordings of some of the artists of that era.
Most of the...
Some of the makers of that era were virtuosos in the banjo. Fred Bacon was,
Right.
Bacon Company.
You was telling me earlier that that was one of the really quality-made instruments, the Bacon banjo.
Yes,
And I'd
but-
never heard of that.
Yeah, I have a Bacon banjo, which I play, a 5-string. Those banjos were all 5-strings, by the way. A very common mistake that most people made is assuming that the 4-string tenor banjo is the original banjo. It isn't. It wasn't developed until after the turn of the century.
So what was?
The 5-string.
Is that right?
Yeah.
They're sort of like today's 5-string?
Yes, with maybe 1 or 2 less strings. There's a watercolor in the Abbey Rockefeller Museum at Williamsburg, a watercolor of a black playing a banjo with 3 long strings and 1 short string.
Mm-hmm.
And it was painted in the 1870s, or 1770s, I'm sorry.
So now how did you get so informed, George, about...
Well, I've always been interested in the banjo, and I've always made it a point to read articles and do a little research, and I've always sort of accumulated and collected banjos.
How many banjos have you handled over the years?
Oh, probably several hundred.
That's incredible.
How many do you own, George?
Far too many. I would say in the range of 80 to 90.
Is that right?
Yes.
Where do you store all those instruments at?
It's difficult.
It's hard to take a pick which one you want to play, I guess, too.
Guys, we're starting to run out of time real quick here. We're going to have to try to sneak in another song here real quick. George, tell us about what we might be listening to next.
Okay, I'm going to play another song that my father really liked, and I use some of the notes that he used, but I play this in a 2-finger style that's quite different from my father's style. And when I sing that song, it seems I just have to play it that way. So it's a song I like also.
What's the name of it?
Pretty Polly.
Okay, let's give it a listen.
Yeah.
Pretty Polly, come go along with me. Polly, pretty Polly, come go along with me. Lord, before we get married, some pleasure to see. Over mountains and valleys so deep, let her. Over mountains and valleys so deep, Polly, pretty Polly, Lord, she began to weep. Saying, Willie, oh dear Willie, I'm feared all your way. Willie, oh dear Willie, I'm feared all your way. Lord, I'm feared you will lead my poor body astray. Oh, we lent her a little farther, and what did they spend? Let her little farther, and what did they spy? Lord, a newly dug grave with a spade lying there. Oh, Polly, pretty Polly, you guessed just about right. Polly, pretty Polly, you guessed just about right. Lord, I dug on your grave the best part of last night. Oh, she fell to her knees and pleaded for her life. Fell to her knees and pleaded for her life. Said, let me be a single girl, Lord, the rest of my life. Oh, he stabbed her to the heart, and the heart's blood did flow. Stabbed her to the heart, and the heart's blood did flow. And to the grave, pretty Polly did go. We threw a little dirt over her and started for home. Threw a little dirt over her and started for home, leaving nothing behind but the warbirds to mourn. Now a debt to the devil, oh Willie must play. Debt to the devil, oh Willie must pay. For a killing pretty Polly, then run away.
Oh man.
Good job.
Oh man. Well, our clock is winding down fast, and there's a couple of things that I wanted our audience to know about you, George, and that is, now you went to high school at
Car Creek, yes.
Car Creek, and then what happened?
Well, I taught school for a couple of years, and then I left the area. I went to Indiana, and basically I've been gone most of the time since. I've been back maybe once or twice a year.
And when was that? From when?
From the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've just completed building a new place here. Is that right?
I'm building a cabin. We moved an old cabin to the home place over in Knott County, and
You're restoring
I'm restoring an old cabin and adding on to it.
And again, our audience can't see this, but George has some of the most incredible pictures
Yeah.
for us to look at relative to musical things about the banjos and the guitars. And so I imagine that place is going to be some kind of a show place for instruments.
Well, I hope that it will be a place that pickers can congregate and sit on the front porch and play and feel at home.
Well,
Sounds like fun.
I can see us do it coming over to George's place
Oh, yeah.
and doing one of our shows from over there.
That sounds
I certainly hope you do.
That would be fun. Now, you've been collecting all these instruments over these many years. Where did you begin to collect those instruments? Did you collect those from your early high school days? Have you been collecting since that point, or?
Well, you know, there were no music stores in the vicinity when I was young. If you got an instrument, you had to trade for one, and I did a few trades, and I had a few old instruments when I left here, and I was always interested in the banjo. And after I left, I became more interested, actually, because I was removed, from my roots, and that was part of me. And collecting old banjos was something I found great fun, researching old banjos.
Well, buddy, I'm telling you, it's incredible. You're certainly one of the most knowledgeable persons about this kind of stuff that I've ever met, and I really appreciate that you've taken out time to come and be on Clyde and my show here.
Yeah.
And we got time to sneak in another song here. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I'd like to do My Last Gold Dollar Was Gone. Now, I had a couple of verses to this song, and then I got a lot more from a wonderful gentleman on Smith's Branch in Knott County. His name is Grandpa Hudson. He lives right above the old folks' home on Smith Branch. And he's a wonderful balladeer and singer. And when I sing a song for him, he listens very closely to make sure I get all the words in the right place and sing all the verses. So I'm going to apologize in advance. And he did celebrate his 84th birthday very recently.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, buddy, thank you very, very much for
buddy.
being a part of our show. And we're going to have you back soon, I hope.
Thanks.
Let's
Okay, My Last Gold Dollar.
Let's invite our audience to tune in next week to the Hometown Music Show, which airs here on WMMT, 6:30 on Tuesday nights and
2:30 on Thursday.
And so y'all be sure and tune us in
And keep picking.
There you go. So we'll fade out with My Last Gold Dollar. And thank you again, George, for being with us.
Thanks much. Here we go.
Oh, my last gold dollar's gone. Oh, my last gold dollar's gone. Well, my board bill is due, my whiskey bill too. And my last gold dollar's gone. She's a darling little girl, I know. She's a darling little girl, I know. She's coming down the stair, combing back her curly hair. She's a darling little girl, I know. bear. But now I'm bound in the walls of jail. Your little feet must go bare. She's dodging from the frost and snow. She's dodging from the frost and snow. Her little feet are bare 'cause she has no shoes to wear. She's dodging from the frost and snow. Oh, darling, 6 months ain't long. Oh, my darling, 6 months ain't long. 6 months ain't long for me to be gone. Oh, darling, 6 months ain't long. Well, I'm going to the west next fall. Lord, I'm going to the west next fall. I may do well and may catch hell, but I'm going to the west next fall.